How's it going, everyone? Roslyn here. Today I'm going to be giving you my early impressions on Tales of Arise. I'll be going over what I like, what I dislike, some general observations I've made about the game, and some things about it that I'm still undecided on as to where my opinion lies. Oh, and I will also be briefly going over my opinion on the game's localization quality thus far, based on the 25-ish hours I've already played. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Hey guys, Present Roz jumping in here real quick just to let you know that since originally scripting and editing this video, I've actually played significantly more of the game. However, instead of completely redoing the video, I've decided to add another Present Roz section near the end of it where I'll give any of my updated thoughts and opinions. This should also let you see how my opinions have changed from the early game to almost the end of the game. Anyways, back to past Roz. Starting off on a positive note, I very much enjoy the combat in Tales of Arise. You attack with a combination of standard attacks, arts, and spells. In total, you can have up to 6 arts or spells assigned to a character you choose to control in battle, with 3 of those 6 slots being dedicated to ground arts and 3 of them to aerial arts. Arts themselves will use up your character's arts gauge, or AG. This is represented by little blue diamonds that appear above the health bar of the character you are currently controlling in battle. As you use your arts, this resource will deplete. And while you will eventually gain a number of ways to replenish AG, in general, it will refill automatically in battle after not attacking for a brief period of time. For the most part, all arts and spells used by characters make use of this AG. The exceptions are beneficial spells, which either restore a party member's HP, revive a fallen party member, or increase a party member's stats. These arts use a different resource known as CP. I'll get into my thoughts on CP a bit later, but for now just know that it's a party-wide resource that in battle is used for beneficial spells. Finally, each character has a gimmick to them that can alter how they function in battle. For example, the main character Alphen can unleash powerful attacks at the end of his combos for 0 AG, but at the cost of his own HP. Meanwhile, Xion can increase the potency of her bomb arts by using a bullet resource unique to her, in which she detonates the bombs herself. And Reenwell, the mage, can choose to store a spell instead of casting it immediately, allowing her to later send out 2 spells in quick succession, or to combine them to make a more powerful spell. Experimenting with new arts, combining them to make different combos, and figuring out when to incorporate each character's gimmick into those combos is one of the aspects of Tales of Arise that I find myself enjoying the most. In addition to the combat, I am also very much enjoying the overall gameplay loop of Tales of Arise, which consists of moving from town to town, picking up side quests, and getting to know the people and their struggles, before eventually tackling a dungeon with a powerful boss at the end. This is pretty standard affair for a JRPG, but it's paced nicely and makes it so that no area overstays its welcome. The pacing is also helped out by the inclusion of a pretty robust fast travel system, letting you easily return to previously explored areas. Something you will definitely want to do in order to pick up new side quests or farm for materials, with which you can use to craft new weapons and accessories, or cook food at an inn or a campsite. Campsites are very important as they offer a place to restore lost CP, cook food which can provide a myriad of buffs, view special skits, and see special scenes with party members you have deepened your bond with. Another important aspect of campsites is that by resting at them, you can cause all of the enemies in the area to respawn, and speed up the rate at which resources respawn as well, making them effective for farming any materials that you may need. Unfortunately though, I can't really talk about the positives of campsites without also touching on my 2 biggest gripes with Tales of Arise. One of the key functions of campsites is to fully restore your party. This means health, of course, but it also means CP, that party-wide resource needed for casting healing and other beneficial spells in battle. But that's not all it's used for. CP is also used in world exploration. Every so often you will come across obstacles or injured people as you are roaming about the world and traversing dungeons. Removing these obstacles or healing the people that you find uses up your CP, making this precious resource even more scarce than it already is. Then there's the fact that the main gimmick of Alphen is to hurt himself to deal damage in battle, which in turn necessitates healing to be directed his way, creating a situation in which you almost feel incentivized to not use a decent portion of the main character's kit in battle. At least you can disable the self-harming abilities for the AI for when you want to control a different character, something I recommend everyone do or else the AI-controlled Alphen will use them with reckless abandon. My main gripe with this CP system is that it actively deters me from wanting to interact with core gameplay systems. At the very least, I would have preferred if it had been decoupled from the world exploration and only used as a battle resource. Moving on from CP, let's talk about what is perhaps my biggest gripe with Tales of Arise: DLC. DLC has been a problem with the Tales series for a while now, with costumes that you could previously acquire in-game being removed from recent entries only to be sold separately. However, things have escalated with Tales of Arise. For starters, if there is ever new DLC available, or if you haven't gone to the store to take a look at the DLC, you will constantly have a little green exclamation point pop up while in the menus to let you know that there is new DLC available. This is exasperated even more whenever you camp at a campsite, as alongside the option to rest, which is also the option that allows you to cook food and converse with your party members, and the option to reminisce, which lets you rewatch cutscenes, there is this little option to check out the downloadable content. And just in case you still didn't know there was DLC, you even get a scrolling ticker on the camp screen letting you know that there is new DLC available. Now all of this would just be an annoyance if all it was the game just letting you know left and right that there is new DLC. However, Tales of Arise has decided to tie player power to the DLC. You see, as you play through Tales of Arise, you unlock titles for your characters, and these titles have arts and passive abilities attached to them. You can then use skill points, or SP, gained through battle and through side quests to unlock these things, which in turn makes your characters more powerful. Well, some of the DLC, specifically the costumes, give your characters titles. And with those titles comes arts and passive abilities you can't otherwise obtain, along with some that are obtained far earlier than normal. The whole thing just doesn't really sit well with me, and I personally will not be purchasing any of the DLC for Tales of Arise, but it is there for anyone who wants it. Moving on, I want to talk about some things that I'm still undecided on as to where my opinions lie, as well as just some general observations that I've made about the game. For starters, I'm not sure how I feel about the overall story, as well as the main character Alphen. Alphen feels very strange to me, because while he looks like a more mature main character you'd expect to see in a Western RPG, he still acts very much like the typical early teen JRPG protagonist. Then there is the main story of Tales of Arise, which so far for this year wins the "so predictable you'd have to be blind and living in a different galaxy to not see the twists coming" award. It probably doesn't help that, at least so far from where I am, the story has quite literally ripped off an anime from about 7 years ago. Now, the story itself is told through a variety of different methods, with in-game cutscenes, CGI cutscenes, anime cutscenes, and even a comic book style of cutscene, the latter of which is also used for the series staple skits. Almost all of this is voiced, though a few of the in-game story sequences have not been. All in all, so far the story has been presented well, though if I'm being honest, I think I would have preferred if the comic book style scenes would have just been used for the skits, as they do tend to feel a little bit out of place when it comes up in main story. But it is what it is. The last thing I wanted to mention before moving on is that Tales of Arise doesn't really actually feel like a Tales game to me. I can't really put my finger on why I feel that way. Maybe it's the new art style, maybe it's the music, maybe it's the fact that Tales of Arise feels very much like a game designed for a Western audience. I don't really know. But that last one actually is a good point, as where past Tales series games were noticeably developed for a Japanese audience, Tales of Arise is the opposite. It's clear from playing it that they were trying to capture a Western audience instead. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to keep in mind if you decide to pick up the game. And that brings me to the last observation I wanted to make before moving on, and that is that, at least when playing on the PlayStation 4 version of the game, I have experienced quite a bit of texture and model pop-in, menu lag, frame rate drops, and even complete freezes all while playing the game. So just keep that in mind. Present Roz here again. Okay, so I'll try to keep this section brief, but in general, my opinions on the game have steadily dropped. While I do still enjoy the core battle system, the novelty of it has worn off, and now it's largely started to feel like more of a chore. There are a number of reasons for this, but they largely boil down to two things. First, you pretty much unlock the entirety of the battle system and its mechanics very early, meaning that the gameplay experience doesn't really evolve outside of whenever you get new arts, which also does start to slow down considerably. This does lead into the second reason, which is the overall tedium of combat as you get into the later half of the game. Basically, with the way monsters and bosses are designed, battles can take needlessly long to complete. Some of the contributing factors to this are enemies that have annoying gimmicks like being temporarily invincible or taking significantly reduced damage unless you use one of your character's burst attacks on them. But the frequency with which you can do this is very limited, at least until very late into the game. Then there are other things like bosses who have hard HP thresholds, preventing you from doing more damage to them until you perform a special action, downed enemies who only stay in that state for mere seconds, teammates who refuse to use certain abilities even when you make it so that they can literally cast nothing but that one ability, etc. That being said, one system that I did see as a negative early on, which actually turned out to not be all that bad, was the CP system. I still would have preferred it be decoupled from world exploration, but overall it really hasn't caused many issues. Next, I do want to touch on the story, as I hadn't really formed my opinion on it when Pastoraz was scripting the video. And it's, okay, I guess? The story remains incredibly predictable, especially if you have played a Tales of series game before, and there really isn't much character growth for any of the party members. Also, Law unfortunately exists as a character. It's also incredibly preachy, with the characters constantly reminding the player why they're on their adventure, because, you know, just in case you forgot in the 20 minutes since they last reminded you. Really, the best way that I can sum up my experience with this game is like this. Normally, when I play JRPGs, I tend to find myself enjoying them more as I get deeper into them, but with Tales of Arise, it's the exact opposite. With the more that I play the game, the less I find myself enjoying it. Finally, I want to touch on the localization for Tales of Arise. For those that don't know, I do speak Japanese, and I actually used to work as a translator and editor in Japan. So with any reviews or impressions I do of games, I like to take note of the game's localization quality. I previously did this with Scarlet Nexus, a game which had a fantastic localization, and I can safely say that Tales of Arise also has a really good one as well, at least when it comes to accuracy. So far in the 25 hours that I have played, I haven't seen any big translation errors, nor have I seen any cut dialogue or even added dialogue. The Western player is for the most part getting the same experience as the Japanese player would. That being said, I have noticed a very high amount of misspellings, punctuation errors, and grammatical errors. So much so that it makes me feel like the translation was either rushed, or quality checking was not done properly by the editor, or both. It's unfortunate because otherwise the localization quality is quite high. Luckily though, this is a digital medium, and so these mistakes can be fixed later on. And that'll do it for my early impressions of Tales of Arise. I haven't decided yet whether or not I'll do a full review once I finish the game, but if you're ever interested in hearing my opinions as I play through, feel free to hit me up over on Twitch at twitch.tv/RoslinGaming, or over my Discord server, both of which are linked in the video description. And as always, if you found this video helpful and informative, please be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, take care.